Hello, my friends, and welcome to the Longwood University Historic Portrait Series, sponsored by the Greenwood Library and the Longwood Center for the Visual Arts. My name is Brent Roberts, and I am Dean of Greenwood Library. This series highlights the work of professors and others from Longwood's long and illustrious past, and includes a physical display here in Greenwood Library, as well as a beautiful digital display available online, prepared by our university archivists. This episode recognizes Dr. Gordon Moss, a longtime Longwood history professor and administrator. Today, I'm joined by two individuals who are very familiar with the work and accomplishments of Dr. Gordon Moss, Dr. Larissa Smith of Longwood University and Dr. Michael Utzinger of Hampton-Sydney College. I will introduce Dr. Smith, and she then, in due course, will introduce Dr. Utzinger. Dr. Larissa Smith is the Provost and Vice President of Academic Affairs here at Longwood University. She's a professor of history, specializing in 20th century African American history, the history of the South, and the history of Virginia. She has a master's and a PhD from Emory University, and she's been at Longwood since 2000. Dr. Smith, welcome. Please tell us a little bit about Dr. Moss and his work and accomplishments here at the then State Teachers College and later Longwood College.
Thank you so much, Dean and Dr. Roberts. It's great to be here this afternoon. And I'm really, Dr. Moss is someone who I've had a chance to study and I feel like get to know a little bit in my role here at Longwood. He served as a professor of history here at Longwood College from 1944 to 1969, and actually did start when it was the State Teachers College. The name changed in 1949. He served as department chair for the Department of History from 1947 to 1960, and he served as what was called Dean of the Faculty from 1960 to 1964. Back then, Longwood was small enough that the Dean of the Faculty served as the Chief Academic Officer. And that's the role I serve in today as Provost, as Chief Academic Officer. So he was essentially in charge of academics and in charge of the faculty. And two, I share with him an interest in and a specialty in American history. Now, he himself was born in Lynchburg in 1899. And he graduated from Washington and Lee University in 1929 with his Bachelor of Arts degree. Prior to graduating from college, he served as a sergeant in World War I in 1918. And so he was a World War I vet and had a particular perspective based on that experience. He then became a history teacher, and in the 1920s went to Yale University, where he earned his PhD in American history. He taught at Longwood in the 1920s and married a hometown girl here, and eventually again secured this longtime position in 1944. And he served at Longwood through a tumultuous time, the time of the Civil Rights era, and when not only was he here to witness the student strike in 1951 at the Moton School that led to a court case that became part of Brown versus Board of Education in 1954. But he also then served here during the school closings period from 1959 to 1964. And during that time, he became an outspoken advocate for the reopening of the schools and an outspoken advocate for equality and justice for all Americans. This was at a time where Longwood itself was not outspoken and was not on the side of angels at that time. In fact, Longwood itself was run by the State Board of Education and therefore had to comply with the state of Virginia's policy of massive resistance, or at least leaders at the time felt they had to comply. Dr. Moss decided to take a different path. In the summer of 1963, Dr. Moss was visited by Neil Sullivan, who would become the superintendent of what was known as the free schools here in Prince Edward County in the 1963-1964 school year. And Sullivan described Moss as, quote, a mild, quiet-spoken man of impeccable Confederate ancestry who had suffered personal abuse and ostracism for his support of public integrated schools. Dr. Moss, when asked by Sullivan why it was that he continued to speak out about having the schools reopen and take this stand and face this abuse and ostracism, Dr. Moss said, "I've been teaching American history for 40 years. I've been teaching that democracy and social justice are the greatest ideals of the American nation. I'd be a traitor to the thousands of students I've taught if I didn't take a stand for these ideals when the opportunity comes." Those are powerful words said in 1963 and powerful words that resonate today. And for students, you can learn more about Dr. Moss by visiting Radcliffe Hall, which is our admissions building. And in there, we talk about Dr. Moss and his role here at the university. And Radcliffe Hall itself was built on the house where Dr. Moss used to live. In addition, you may remember and know that we renamed one of our dormitories for Dr. Moss this fall, our freshman dormitories. So we're very proud of what he has done, and we celebrate him. And I'm so delighted that we can celebrate him more today. And to do that and to help us with that is my friend and colleague, Dr. Mike Utzinger from Hampton-Sydney College. He serves as the William W. Elliott Professor of Religion there. And he too attended Yale University like Dr. Moss. He earned his Master's of Divinity there after earning his undergraduate degree at Valparaiso University. And he also earned his PhD in European and American religious history from the University of Virginia. He is an award-winning teacher and professor at Hampton-Sydney, having earned the Cabell Award for Excellence in Teaching in 2010, and in 2015 was awarded Hampton-Sydney's highest honor for a faculty member, the Thomas Edward Crawley Award. Dr. Utzinger has published books and articles on American modern religious history. He has published an article on Prince Edward County, and particularly on John's Memorial Episcopal Church and Gordon Moss's work in that. And his current research is on the role of religion during massive resistance in Virginia. And you will often, if you see Dr. Utzinger and I together, you will often see us in a corner kind of in deep conversation about all of the amazing things he's uncovering and finding in his research. Dr. Utzinger also serves on the Community Council of the Mote Museum and is very much deeply involved in his own church, which is also the same as Dr. Moss's, John's Memorial Episcopal Church. So Dr. Utzinger, welcome.
Thank you very much, Dr. Smith. Thank you, Dr. Roberts, for a gracious introduction. I am very excited to talk about Gordon Moss. And one of the things about Gordon Moss that interests me is how could an individual that has and had so much to lose in a town that was very much against the principles that he put forward, why and how would he do the work that he did? And I stumbled upon a quotation in an interview, and this is what Moss said. "Actually, I've prevented any too strong personal attack being launched upon myself, since I was always insisted my opposition was based upon, first, my belief that public education was an absolutely necessary foundation stone for America, if America is going to be a leading world nation. Second, I have insisted that my opposition was based upon my belief in democracy, and that in a democracy, there cannot be second-class citizens. And finally, I have based my opposition and insisted that it be so recognized on Christianity, on the principle that Christianity forbids the mistreatment of any subordinate group in the society. Accordingly, I have virtually defied people and insisted that if they wanted to criticize me, that they would have to admit they did not believe in public education, that they did not believe in democracy, and they did not believe in Christian principles. Now, one of the things about Gordon Moss that I think is critical is that his movement to this place was a gradual movement. He did not come ready-made from heaven in a glad bag, ready to go, right, for your evening lunch. I mean, what he was ready and he wanted to think about things. He was cautious, and he had a lot of reasons to be cautious. So his ideas, though, had foundations, and one of which, not surprisingly, is education. 1 year after he came to Longwood College in 1945, Moss defended the value of liberal arts education in a way that, to my mind, seems as fresh today as when he wrote it close to 75 years ago. And this is what he said: "What could more fundamentally destroy the American way of life," said Moss, "than confirm all future generations in the assumption that making a living is an end in itself? All our higher values would be meaningless if making a living did not have as its goal assurance of the opportunity to live a life. Liberal arts," Moss claimed, "would seem to lie more nearly in the secondary results or byproducts of these studies, rather than specific content in a field of study." And he listed what those would be. What does a liberal arts education give us? It gives us discipline of mind, critical thinking, open-mindedness, tolerance, love of truth and love of beauty, the capacity to live intelligently, and an awakened social consciousness. In 1945, Moss never thought about this applying to his African-American neighbors who were just down the road. There's no indication that he ever visited the African-American school that Barbara Johns was worried about and protested in 1951. There's no writings that he had about Brown versus the Board of Education in 1954. And it wasn't until the school closings that he really started to have a movement of his consciousness. He was hardly an ally of the Black community so much as he was appalled that children of any race would be denied an education. In fact, one person, Gene Fairfax of the American Friends Service Committee, in a private communique said, "Moss was a segregationist with a conscience." And I think that's fair. That same year, they worked to try to create a biracial committee in the county that had to meet secretly, I might add. And it turns out that Reverend L. Francis Griffin, the pastor of First Baptist Church and the leader of the local NAACP in Farmville, was looking for somebody who was in the white community to join. Fairfax said that she really didn't think that Moss was up to the task. But Griffin disagreed. He said he felt he could work with Moss, and it might be worthwhile with somebody of his stature to be part of the group. And Griffin did approach Moss himself, and his instincts were good. Moss not only met with Griffin and other African-American leaders, he ultimately agreed to co-chair the biracial meeting, and as it was called, and had to take place in secret, as I mentioned. Through those discussions, Moss became more and more convinced that the injustice of the school closings demanded his action, but he still remained reluctant. By August of 1960, the American Friends Service Committee worker Irene Osborne said, "It is clear that Moss is beyond his friends and is not quite prepared to take the leap of tying in with his people who are stronger." Moss was facing a lot of resistance. He had to meet in secret, but his conscience, his commitment to education were pushing him forward. And most importantly, his relationship with Griffin was pushing him forward. But there was one more step that he needed, and that was for him the step of faith or his religious convictions. The school closings broadened Moss's conception of education and politics and what that meant, but it was his personal faith and his connection with his local parish that moved him to action. Although I should say his Episcopal faith, maybe not so much the parish. To this end, Moss attended the first annual meeting of the Episcopal Society for Cultural and Racial Unity in Williamsburg, Virginia in January 1961. And in January, ESCRU leaders challenged Episcopalians in general and Southern Episcopalians specifically to overturn segregation within their churches and within the nation. Historian Gardner Shattuck has rightly observed that ESCRU was one of a chorus of civil rights groups, such as the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and the National Catholic Conference for Interracial Justice, which religiously attempted to mobilize resources to bear upon issues of race and integration. ESCRU's founding in 1951 coincided with a revitalized stage in the civil rights movement as well, which used sit-ins as a strategy to integrate white-only establishments. Not only did Black activists target lunch counters, theaters, and restaurants, they also recognized that kneel-ins at white churches could provide a powerful modicum for change. Now, locally in Farmville, not so interested in ESCRU. In fact, they were quite embarrassed when Gordon Moss was quoted in the local newspaper, the Richmond Times-Dispatch, saying something nice about integration, or desegregation as the term would have been at the time. And in fact, they were so concerned that in a January vestry meeting, a vestry in which Moss was a member, they passed a resolution condemning ESCRU and Moss's participation at the meeting. Not only that, they didn't want to just simply make a statement by the vestry, they wanted to embarrass and cow Moss as well, and had the statement read from the pulpit the following Sunday as he sat in the pew. This was something that was shocking to the community, that Gordon Moss would even be seen with people interested in desegregation. Moss resigned from the vestry. He said he was unwilling to be part of a group that would take such action. This actually caught the vestry off guard. They just wanted to get him back in line. They weren't so interested in him leaving. They begged him to stay for an hour and he refused. And ultimately he sent his resignation, but stayed on as the treasurer, which was a non-voting member of the group. Ultimately, Moss not only refused to condemn ESCRU, he wrote in the margins of the statement, "Not complying, Gordon Moss," so that it was there forever, everybody could see. He also put into practice almost all of ESCRU's proposals for change, including helping stage a kneel-in at John's Memorial Church, about which I will talk about in a moment, and refusing to send his son to the private white academy, and resigning from organizations that practiced segregation. When asked about this in 1963, he said, "I don't think I particularly suffered much personally because of my criticism in the local situation. I've been snubbed on Main Street by virtually lifetime friends. I sit in a pew by myself in church every Sunday. I'm not allowed to serve on the vestry, although my work as treasurer is quite willingly accepted." There were other things, though, going on besides social snubbing. His position was threatened professionally and economically. Within a matter of days after his first public speech defending public education in 1959, a delegation was in the office of the president of Longwood College demanding that he would be fired. In the winter of 1961, there was an attempt to get the State Board of Education to give a petition to fire him, but there weren't enough signatories to it to allow it to go forward. Regardless, the attempt to stop him only emboldened him. In effect, what became abstract for Moss became personal and practical. And in fact, he became less of a man of thought and more of an individual of action. I think this is most dramatically shown in July of 1963 in the kneel-in which he helped orchestrate. What this was a group of Black activists, local students in Farmville who went to white church in order to create a desegregated worship setting. In most cases, students were turned away. In one case, on the steps of Farmville Baptist Church, 23 students were actually arrested, including the Reverend L. Samuel Williams, who is leading the group. But a group of 7 students went to John's Memorial Episcopal Church, and Gordon Moss was waiting for them. As the usher let them into the church, as they were directed by the rector, who was on vacation that day, I might add, to go to the front of the church to embarrass them, Gordon Moss stepped out and invited them to sit in his pew. This was something that was shocking to the members of the church. One parishioner recalled to me that the scene was memorable contrast in color. Dr. Moss had white hair and always wore a white linen suit. And sitting with African-American students was a contrast of memory. The members of the church were generally dumbstruck. They were so shocked they didn't know what to do. They just let the students in and Gordon Moss worshiped with them. But the following Monday, they knew exactly what they were going to do, and they summarily fired him as treasurer of the church. Moss, for his part, wryly responded that he assumed that they had finally gotten his resignation that he had given only a few years earlier and took it seriously. Moss's participation in this kneel-in, however, was not spontaneous. He had decided to demonstrate this way after thoughtful consideration in the belief he had to participate. And what I want to do is I want to read you as a conclusion a statement that he made before he participated. This statement, I believe, he wrote because he thought there could be violence. He was actually worried, and he wanted to make sure that there were statements. He had seen what had happened in Birmingham that same summer, and he knew and felt it could be possible in Farmville. So this is a portion of what he wrote and why he said he participated. And I quote, "In the last decade, I have tried to do what I could to relieve this unpardonable sin against God, in whose image all mankind was created. I have written to various newspaper editors. I have protested at public hearings of governmental bodies. I have explored and discussed the question with all who would discuss it with me. I have joined various groups, local, state, and national, and attended meetings near and far. I have lectured at various public meetings. I spent hours being interviewed by reporters from national and international periodicals. I have participated in television interviews. I have given up a son since the age of 13 as a symbol of my disapproval of the local educational situation. I have participated in the formation and regular meetings of a biracial group as a means of keeping lines of communication open. This listing of my actions over recent years has but one purpose only. If I have attempted the above without achieving any alleviation, much less solution of our problem, where does this leave me? There's only one thing left to do: demonstration, as a means of ultimately focusing the white man's attention upon a problem which must be met and solved. However distasteful conspicuous action may be to me, however abhorrent peaceful action which may produce violent counter-reaction may be to me, I have no choice. My higher responsibilities to education as a preparation for the fullest possible life, to my nation to keep her strong, to humanity for the humane life, and to the Father of mercies and to the God of all comforts, as one who would humbly try to live in a Christ-like way of life, All these higher responsibilities demand of me the ultimate logic, participation in peaceful demonstration. During the last decade and more, we have seen in this community guilt, even though unacknowledged. That guilt produced fear. That guilt has bred hatred. And the inevitable product of hatred is death. The only hope for Prince Edward County is to replace the sense of guilt by the reality of love. And then love will produce concerned action and even sacrifice. And such sacrificial love will flower into justice for all mankind. Only on our knees in reverent and fervent prayer will we of this community find pardon and freedom and justice for all men. Gordon Moss went on 1 week later to participate in the kneel-in. I think that Gordon Moss has many legacies that this university can be proud of. One thing I wish to note to students is it took time. He was older, and this old dog learned a whole lot of new tricks. It's never too late to start and to do something new and to do something right. The other thing I think is that the most important legacy that Moss would have thought would have been his students. So I address you as students of Longwood University. And I think I would do it in a way that Moss would approve. Marshal your convictions, whether they be moral or religious, so that you can make a difference for the betterment of humanity. And don't waste this precious moment in your education. It's there to be a foundation for you to do those things that are good and right and just. And then develop the habits of mind so that you can recognize what those things are and so that you can do them. I think that would be a way to honor Gordon Moss and his legacy.